Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Nonprofit Resource Hub's Board Development Panel discussion. I'd like to welcome everybody. We had an overwhelming response to this particular event. We're really delighted to have you. We know everybody's busy, so you will be able to get a recording after this is over via email. We do hope that you will stay for the duration of the discussion. My name is Allison Laferlita. I'm the Executive Director for the Nonprofit Resource Hub. We are here to help our nonprofit organizations, our members, our associate members, our service providers, and providers of goods to the nonprofit industry. We also provide you with resources, education, hence the hub. We are here to help you in any way that we possibly can. So if you're new to the hub, welcome. If you're a nonprofit and you are not yet a nonprofit partner, I encourage everybody to join. There is no fee for a nonprofit to join, and you will gain so much from your participation with us. So if you have any questions, please feel free to call us afterward. Today, we are hosting a very important topic. Clearly, we have a huge response for it. And this panel is made up of some really terrific experts in their fields. I will say that you will hear from each person individually between 8 to 10 minutes, and then we will open up the floor for Q&A. We have Christine Deska, who is the co-founder for Bell's Board and Nonprofit Sector, David Goldstein, partner with Sir Tilman Ballin, and we have Stephen Powers, co-founder of Open Impact Real Estate. So welcome to the three of you. Thank you for contributing your time today. We really appreciate it. And I know that our participants are going to gain quite a bit from this experience. So if you have any questions about the hub, please let us know. If you have any questions, you are welcome to type them into the chat as well. And without further ado, thank you again for joining us. I'm going to start with our first presenter, Christine Deska.
Thanks so much, Allison. All right, hopefully everybody can see the screen that was just shared. Can I see some nodding heads of my fellow presenters? All right. First, thanks everyone. We know you have a lot you could be doing right now, and we really appreciate you spending your time with us. So I'm Christine Deska. I'm the co-founder of Bell's Board and Nonprofit Sector Strategies. Part of what we do is we spend a lot of time working with nonprofit organizations in developing board development action plans, right? So what I've done for this talk is to just hopefully shine a light on some of the top challenges and give you some ideas on how you can go about overcoming those challenges, and why many of us are in the same boat. I don't know that there's really any nonprofit that we work with that is not struggling or working on one aspect of their board development strategy. So what I'm going to cover is what I'm calling the challenge buckets, right? Essentially, I wonder why, if we wonder why nonprofits are so stretched and strapped capacity-wise, you're expected to do so much, right? So in addition to all of your mission-driven work, now we're layering on what's essentially expecting you to have sort of this in-house HR department that is managing your good governance practices. And a good, efficient, effective board of directors is incredibly vital to your organization's sustainability, success over time, and really your mission impact. So these challenge buckets, I'm going to touch on each one briefly, and hopefully you'll see some of the things you're already doing very well, and then others you might not have thought could really make an impact in making your board more efficient and effective over time. So let's jump into the first bucket. So when it comes to attracting and recruiting, we work with nonprofits all the time who are really focused on growing their boards. So where does this start? So I just want to kind of have all of us take a breath for a moment and think about, how is your organization perceived, right? From the outside world, when someone's looking in, how do you think they're perceiving your organization? And I ask that question because that really is an important aspect of the types of board members you can attract, the types of board members who might be interested in serving your organization, and how are these potential folks going to be connected to your mission or not, right? And so a best practice when it comes to this challenge bucket is to consider a board matrix facilitated session. If you haven't done this before, it's essentially a grid where you strategize around where are the gaps in your board. What skill sets are you missing? Do you need more folks with resources? Most likely, right? But do you need more folks with certain connections to your mission, connections to the people you serve? And so the last bullet is, have you asked? It may sound obvious, but we work with organizations who haven't gone to their most trusted, most kind of important board members and just ask them if they know someone else who might be a good fit for your board. And if you're considering a more formal approach, if you're a larger organization, or if this is something that's on your docket, have you posted the role, right? Board membership, board service is a high-level volunteer role. It's a job, right? You really want to view it as finding that good fit, just like you would with filling any other job description or high-level volunteer. The second challenge bucket I'll touch on in the 8 minutes I have here. So the only thing worse than not having enough board members is having a problematic board member, right? So we've all, I think, probably dealt with, what if someone isn't a good fit, but how can you kind of avoid getting to that point in the first place? You can have a really efficient process in bringing new members on board. There should be an interview process. It doesn't have to be in depth, but it should be a process that's defined. And over time, you can build this out. It doesn't all have to happen at once, but putting these processes in place can really lead you to the right board members for your organization. And it goes both ways. And we'll talk about conveying expectations in a couple minutes. Board members should also feel that they're a good fit for your organization, that they can contribute. Otherwise, this partnership, as it should feel, it might not work, right? And this vetting process that you can put in place for your organization, this is part of what we help organizations with through our action plan process, right? What should be in place to make sure that your organization ends up with effective board members, right? Do you have a nominating committee? Could you start one so that you can delegate some of this to some folks that you already have in-house who could be incredibly helpful in making sure that as your board grows, it's done strategically. So onboarding, right? Similar to any other organization you're joining, if it's an official staff role or otherwise, we as humans, the universal feeling we want is to feel a sense of belonging. And this is no different when someone joins a board. So just some pretty simple but important best practices. Make sure that new board member can have a one-on-one meeting with someone, whether it's a fellow board member, a board president, or the executive director, to make sure that they're being welcomed, right? Ideally, there's an onboarding process that your organization has in place. And that again, that perception of having it could be something pretty simplistic, a few steps, but having that in place, it will make your new board member feel, wow, your organization really has it together. You're functioning at a high level. You have your ducks in a row. Have you introduced them to your strategic plan? I don't think I can do any talk without mentioning the importance of having an active strategic plan, because all of this should come together. And so a simple best practice here is a peer matchup. If you're strapped capacity wise, do a quick matchup. When a new board member comes on, give them a point of contact that's another board member who's going to make one phone call to them in the beginning and let them know they have someone to lean on, right? This is more challenging now in our virtual environment that many of us are still operating in, or if you're serving on a board that's geographically spread out, it's harder to get that connection and feel that connection. But once you can build that, it's so important. I was thinking earlier today why I play on soccer teams and not go to the gym, because no one's waiting for me at the gym. But if I don't show up to my soccer game, I'm going to feel the wrath of my fellow teammates, right? When you feel a connection to a team, as one should with their board, you show up and you follow through, because you have that connection. And if there can be a physical component to your orientation, if you can do a walkthrough of your site, if you can expose your board members to your mission in action. I think someone from the book fairies might be on. I will not forget being at your warehouse, right? I won't forget being at some of our clients' offices where we see what's going on. That can go a long way in terms of board engagement. So conveying expectations. This is across the board something that can make or break a new board member's experience and your organization's experience with your board. Now, David will scold me for putting the word contract here. It does not have to be a contract, but there should be something that really outlines it, a document that complements your role description, that lets your board member know what are you expecting, how many meetings should they attend throughout the year. Do they need to join a committee upon joining the board? What are the term limits, right? Terms are incredibly important for a variety of reasons, but if you have a problematic board member, you have this opportunity to reevaluate. And so as much as you can convey these expectations effectively in a simple manner, it will go a long way, because you don't want a board member coming on and being hit with things that they weren't expecting. And that happens all the time. This happens in life across the board. And so this is something that can really make for a smooth transition onto the board, and even in the midst of board service. This doesn't have to only happen at the onset of bringing on a new board member. So the last challenge bucket I'll highlight, just to get the wheels turning in your head, is what do we all mean by active engagement? This is different for every organization, right? Some organizations have working boards where you're really expecting your board members to be with you in the trenches at times. Others are more high level. The high level approach is ideal if you can get to that capacity wise. But you want to make it easy for your board members to access information, right? Younger board members especially want everything in one place. You know, our product Bell's board is a mobile app and also a central location, but there's many ways you can accommodate that for your board members so that when they need information, they know where to find it. That's the bottom line. And also so that they can communicate with one another in an effective way. Ask for what you need from your board members. Don't miss the opportunities to ask where a skill set could be helpful. If you're growing a part of your programming and you think someone could have a connection, don't miss the opportunity to ask. Board members join because they want to give back. There's something called a self-assessment that you can implement in-house or with the help of outsiders that can really jumpstart this at any point. It will remind board members why they joined. It will remind them what they committed to, right? And it can energize your board at any point. And I can't end without mentioning the team and relationship building aspects of this. As human beings, as I mentioned before, we want to feel connected to organizations that we serve. And so any ways you can kind of implement team building or bring in speakers to focus on this as you're growing your board and your mission, the better it will be for your organization in the long term. So hopefully I've hit my 9-minute mark, and I'll wrap up there and let the next speaker take over.
Thank you so much, Christine. We really appreciate your sharing your knowledge with us, and I'm sure you'll have more questions following the next two presentations. I would like to introduce everybody to our next speaker, David Goldstein.
So I'm David Goldstein, and I'm the founder and chair of the nonprofit tax-exempt religious organizations practice group at the Sir Tillman Ballin Law Firm. Also just finished 5 terms as chair of the Not-for-Profit Corporations Law Committee of the State Bar Association. So representing nonprofits and religious corporations and also people who have disputes with them is what I do. And we're gonna try to quickly run through, and I apologize for rapid speaking today, but I want to try to get through as much as I can in terms of understanding fiduciary duties of nonprofit board members. And the basic starting point is really 2 fundamental precepts. First, that directors of nonprofits have legal duties, which the technical term for those is fiduciary duties. And this can come as a very unpleasant surprise for board members. So it's good to know this going in, that there can be personal liability to directors for breaching these legal duties. So what are the fundamental legal duties that nonprofit directors have under New York law? There are 3 of them: the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, and the duty of obedience. Let's start with the duty of care. And this is actually set forth in the Not-for-Profit Corporation Law, Section 717A. The duty of care is what it sounds like. A director has to discharge the duties of his or her position in good faith and with the care an ordinarily prudent person in a like position would exercise under similar circumstances. This boils down to the oversight function that the board has. It requires familiarity with the organization's finances and activities and regular participation in its governance. One nice and very succinct example of how this duty of care was utilized in a lawsuit is the summons in the Healing Arts Initiative lawsuit from 2016. And right at the beginning of the lawsuit, at the caption, you would see who the defendants are, and it's everybody on the board. So all of the board members were named as individual defendants sued personally in their individual capacity. And what did the summons say? It said that this is an action to hold accountable the directors of Healing Arts Initiative who, in violation of not-for-profit corporation law section 717 that we were just talking about, and 720 and other applicable statutory or common law, have neglected, failed to perform, and or violated their duties, including the duty to act in good faith and with the care an ordinarily prudent person in like position would exercise under similar circumstances in their management of the corporation by permitting $750,000 to be stolen by 3 now former employees, hiring non-independent auditors, negligently hiring employees, and otherwise breaching their duties to Healing Arts Initiative. So there you see it. You've got the duties. If you breach them, you could have potential personal liability. These actions by the directors constitute a breach of contract, breach of fiduciary duty, and violations of not-for-profit corporation law. And the suit was for an amount not less than $750,000, which was foreseeably and proximately caused by defendants' conduct or misconduct, plus attorney's fees and punitive damages. And the suit was also for the removal of the board. So the duty of care is really the critical oversight function, as we said. And board members always ask me, how do I understand that? How do I give more context to that? I hear the words, I understand the definition, but give me some parameters. And so what we're going to distribute, and we'll send it around to everyone at some point after today's webinar, is a wonderful guidance document written for non-lawyers by the New York State Attorney General's Charities Bureau. It's called Right from the Start: Responsibilities of Directors of Not-for-Profit Corporations. And I encourage the boards of my clients to read this once a year. It's about 9 pages. It's written in plain English, and it really gives you a wonderful head start to understanding what your legal duties are. A little more in depth, it was the 1997 lawsuit involving Delphi University. That is probably about a 60 or 70 page opinion and goes into wonderful detail about what the board did and didn't do and what their missteps were in a variety of situations. Similarly, if you look at the complaint in the Dowling College litigation, Dowling fell into bankruptcy and closed, and the unsecured creditor trustee in the bankruptcy sued 13 individual board members and the Dowling CFO. That also is an excellent way to get a sense of what directors are responsible for doing by understanding how the lawsuit laid out what they didn't do. And key to that complaint in Dowling was the lack of information flow to the board. So you as a board member and an officer, it's not simply your job to exercise oversight and deal with what gets put right in front of you. You have an affirmative obligation to go out and obtain sufficient information in a timely fashion and accurate information at that, so that you can fulfill your oversight function. Internal controls are critical. Policies and procedures are critical. There's another Charities Bureau publication here that talks about internal controls for nonprofits. And then finally, audit oversight is an incredibly important part of nonprofit governance and the not-for-profit corporation law. And the audit committee is the only committee that has an entire section of the law dedicated just to the committee and how it's supposed to function. Okay, duty of loyalty, that's the next fiduciary duty. And that's fairly straightforward. A director has to act in the interest of the organization. It requires undivided allegiance to the organization's mission when using the power of his or her position or information concerning the organization or its property. And where we see this play out most commonly is conflicts of interest in related party transactions. That's an incredibly important area of priority in New York nonprofit law, and is a very common area of interest for enforcement by regulators and also for litigation by private litigants in civil actions. So conflicts of interest in related party transactions are something to always keep your eye on. Duty of obedience. This is the third of the basic fiduciary duties. It's the least understood and therefore most often neglected of the three primary legal duties. Why? This fiduciary duty, the duty of obedience, is only applicable to the not-for-profit law context. The other two duties are present in business law corporations as well. What is the duty of obedience? To ensure that the organization complies with applicable laws and regulations and its internal governance documents and policies. So it's really a two-headed monster. Compliance with applicable laws is even more difficult than it sounds because, of course, there are multiple layers of laws and regulations, state, local, federal. So the not-for-profit corporation law is the primary New York State law that deals with not-for-profit corporations. And it's really worth taking a moment to think about what the concepts around the not-for-profit corporation law are. Best efforts under difficult circumstances is absolutely not the compliance standard. The not-for-profit corporation law is what it sounds like. It's a law. It has mandatory requirements and procedures. There are bright lines. Sometimes they're very rigid, inflexible, and unforgiving. And one example I'd like to point out is that in New York, most cemeteries by law are required to be nonprofits. And during the pandemic, one of my cemetery clients, really at the height of the pandemic, the most horrible time for us here in New York, was seeking a waiver to delay their annual membership meeting, and they couldn't get it from any of the relevant regulators. And there you go, inflexible and sometimes unforgiving. The duty of obedience, the other prong, compliance with internal governance documents, that implicates your basic governance documents, including the certificate of incorporation, very important because your corporate purposes are set forth in that document, bylaws, which has mechanics for how the corporation is governed, conflict of interest policy, which is very important under New York law, investment policy, which is required of every nonprofit, no matter how small your assets may be under New York law, and more. So even that prong is a lot to deal with. Traps for the unwary, common mistakes, compliance with the certificate of incorporation. It's a document that's filed when you first start, and a lot of nonprofits put it away and don't look at it again. And that can be a critical mistake, because to the extent that your purposes evolve before they evolve in terms of your changing your mission and your activities, you need to amend your certificate of incorporation to permit that. The bylaws also are something that have to be a constant focus for nonprofits. And of course, the law itself, which is incredibly detailed and complicated, is something that nonprofits have an affirmative obligation, the duty of obedience, to comply with. My tagline is nonprofit governance. It's not rocket science, and it isn't. But what it does is it requires continuous effort and attention to detail, lots of process, lots of procedures, lots of mandatory requirements. No board can tackle this without board education. I have some clients that are boards made up entirely of lawyers, and even those boards need that same support and board education, because the law is very specialized and detailed, and it's not easy to get your arms around it. Awareness of these fiduciary duties and the legal requirements, even under extraordinary circumstances, and bottom line is there needs to be discipline and commitment to continuous compliance. And I'll stop there. Thanks, everybody. Sorry for the rapid pace.
Thank you, David, so much. I appreciate that. And once again, as David mentioned, you will be receiving a digital copy of the document that he encourages everybody to review with your boards. So stay tuned for that. I would like to introduce our last presenter this afternoon, Stephen Powers of Open Impact Real Estate.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Stephen Powers. I'm the co-founder of Open Impact Real Estate. We are a real estate firm that specializes in serving the nonprofit community. We have the largest nonprofit practice in New York City. And we're essentially consultants and brokers to help nonprofits through these big decisions related to how their space can help them deliver on mission and acquiring space that is sustainable and supports their mission sustainably. We work with a really wide range of nonprofits, from schools such as like KIP and Democracy Prep, as well as some private schools and universities, social service agencies like Goodwill and Children's Aid Society, foundations like Robin Hood Foundation and Miss Foundation, and museums and theaters and cultural organizations such as the National Math Museum and the Barrel Theater Group. So as you can imagine, a really wide range of nonprofits that we work with. But what is always core to our process is getting the board to build consensus along the way and support the strategy for their space needs, and then to actually make a decision so that they are able to move forward in a way that doesn't cause for the conversations to spiral out of control. So as I'm sure you can imagine, the great thing with a board, and I'm sure you have experience with this, is you want a bunch of different expertise and voices, right? So you have 10 to 30 people on this board of different expertise and voices, and sometimes those voices can spiral out of control and cause you to go backwards. And when we're working on a project that is a critical transaction, they need to be brought along the way so that you're able to build at the critical milestones and then get approval to move forward so that you don't end up having to start over again once you think you're at the finish line. So what I wanted to show you today, we always say we speak board. We always are involved with presentations to the board throughout different milestones of the project. And one of the things that is important in order to facilitate decision making is to get your board to know that you did your homework, that you did your due diligence. So, one way to do that is to involve them in every aspect of the project. That's not efficient, and also your board member doesn't want to do that. The other is to show them, hey, visually, we've done a lot of work, and that if you want to see this big stack of papers, we can send it to you, but here's a way for you to show them process without having to go into all the nitty gritty. So this is an example of a process that we do for a project where we needed to show them we looked at a ton of things and that we reviewed them carefully, that we presented for this is actually for a school, and they needed to understand how many things they've really seen, that we've demonstrated we run a competitive RFP process, and now here at this day and age, we are ready to talk about the 2 finalists. So forget about everything else we've done in the past. Know that we did it, and we're presenting to you to make a decision based upon these 2. And it's amazing how something as simple as this slide, we call it the funnel slide, and we're happy to let you guys steal that for your own purposes, helps them demonstrate the work they've done in the past, and then doesn't ask them 99 out of 100 times, they don't want to go back and look at that list of 900. They're happy that you did it. They want to see and talk about these top 2. All right, so this is an example of setting expectations of what the process is going to be and what the board decision-making involvement is going to be along the way. So we do this at the start of every project. This is for one of our clients that's a museum, and they needed to, it's a big project. The board is a fundraising board, so they need to be involved in certain milestones. And they need to understand what they're in for. So, these projects are 2 years plus in the making. We need to show them what the end in sight is and then what the key phases are going to be. But they're, again, not going to be involved in every little aspect of it, right? So a lot of it's going to be, the management team should be empowered to be able to make all the critical decisions along the way. And the board is just getting involved in key milestones. So what we do is we have this presentation where on this one slide, we show them the entire process, and then on the bottom, when the board is going to need to get involved and when they should expect to be able to be involved. And what this does is, this is oftentimes an executive committee that's going to be involved, or maybe a specific facilities committee if the board is that involved. That's going to be involved in some of the early decisions, and maybe there's an entire board that's going to be involved for sort of making the final decision to execute a lease. But what's critical is that they get involved early on so that early on they approve the project budget, early on they approve the strategy that we're going to go after, so the type of things that we're doing, that they feel involved in sort of a presentation of some of the main top properties so they know what the competition was. They get involved and actually see some of these things. And then before you actually do a transaction, the lease negotiation process is oftentimes 3 to 6 months of negotiation. It's a real bear. So before we do that, we want to have approval that we're going to invest in the money of bringing on a real estate attorney to negotiate this lease. And that early approval is really helpful. You wouldn't think of it as being such an important thing, but by doing that and doing it early, by the time you get to the point of actually having to execute, they feel that they've already committed to move forward. And the approval to execute the lease is oftentimes just an administrative thing. The board comes together, they know what they've approved previously, and they're ready to move forward. And this is really helpful for the management team to be able to keep their board moving along the process. The final example is something we work with Robin Hood Foundation, and we call this the Robin Hood method, because Robin Hood has a lot of community partners who work with them on a really wide range of projects. And this is an example of a office project, but the office was office mixed with mission. And so this was office that also had some education component to it for a graduate school. So what's important here is being able to show your board or the finance committee or the subcommittee that you're talking to, what are the headlines, but don't get caught in the weeds. If you show a board a financial performance, especially on a Zoom call, everyone's gonna get looking at the document, and they're gonna be on different pages, and they're not gonna be paying attention to what you're talking about. So instead what we do is we show the headlines, and then we send the financial performance to the folks that wanna see it afterwards so they can dig in. But these numbers are the key things. And by the way, it's not necessarily what you would always think of. We make sure that we focus on the headlines that matter. So for example, we want to know what the base rent is, what it's going to cost you on average. And then for this client, it was important to talk about impact metrics. So what is this going to be, the cost per student and the cost per employee across different options? Because oftentimes in real estate, all people talk about is the dollars per square foot. And that's not the whole picture. And so we work with our clients to focus on what the critical headlines are, and then to focus on those. And this is a tool by focusing your lens on the things that the management decides are important. It helps get your board to focus and align on those same points. So instead, if they were looking at a big financial document with 100 lines on it, someone on the board might think that a certain aspect of it is really important that might derail the conversation. This gives management control to be able to control the conversation in a way that leads to effective decision making. And again, feel free to steal the Robin Hood method for your own purposes. It's something that I'm sure they'd be happy for you to use. But the critical part is to really pull out the headlines and not get caught in the weeds. And those are my 3 examples which you guys have and sent to you in advance. And again, we pride ourselves in being a resource to the nonprofit community. And if you have any questions, any of this stuff, feel free to reach out to me directly. That's my personal email to help answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Stephen. So as we were going through the presentations, it seems like the recurring message is preparation, communication, and setting expectations. The more you communicate with your board, the more everybody knows what's expected of them. The more you communicate with them, they understand what their responsibilities are. And the more you communicate with them, they can then fulfill their role and it's fruitful for them as well. So I do want to open up the floor for questions now to our group. I do ask that you raise your hand in the chat, and then this way Kelly Ann will call you out as she sees you. So does anybody have a question to start with?
Yes, my dog is in my office, so I muted myself. Okay. For the first presentation, so I have one question from each. So the first presentation for the team building exercise, so I'm the new part-time ED for a group that I had been on the board with. So I'm extremely knowledgeable about the complicated role that I've just agreed to, as well as board knowledge stuff. And team building is really important. And do you suggest doing team building with the staff as well? Because one thing that the board is not knowledgeable about a lot of modern tech and about what the staff is even doing half the time. So that's a huge thing. And I know that the ED's job is to communicate such things and to manage that. But I really, I've been thinking over the last 48 hours that team building is going to be, I keep calling everybody, we're, team NAMI, and this is a NAMI thing. Bottom line is, do you suggest including the staff in a team building exercise?
So great question, and thank you for that. I'm sure others have this. What I've seen work, it depends on the timing that you have available. You can rotate executive management folks through your board meetings, right? It's wonderful for the board to get a sense of who the leaders are at the organization and get to know those folks. It's better for connecting, better for learning more about the programming, the mission. In terms of light team building, something as simple as an icebreaker that you can incorporate into a board meeting to learn more about, so board members can learn more about one another, can go a long way. And then of course, I'll just give one other suggestion. If you don't currently have a board retreat in place, it's a wonderful way to incorporate and really set aside dedicated time for team building. And I think it's really nice to incorporate, it can be, depending on the dynamics of your group and your executive team or your management, a portion of that retreat where the staff can interact with board members and get to know one another better. And then they'll know, right? Board members will know coming in that this is a dedicated time for team building and learning more about the organization. And you can highlight a topic that's most important and rotate through topics over the years so that board members continue to be engaged in that way.
Any value in a Zoom team building exercise?
If you have to do it over Zoom, it's better than not doing it.
Okay.
That's what I would say. And I can talk with you offline about ways you can make it more engaging. There's a lot of great platforms out there that really can make sure people aren't running off and doing who knows what while in the midst of your retreat. But best in person if you can.
All right, thank you. My
Sure.
next one, if I'm allowed to add two more, is so again, I'm very familiar with the fiduciary, responsibilities and legal responsibilities of the board, because that was a shocker to me when I became a board member. I was clueless, but I'm a business owner, so I get it, but it was still a shocker to me. But anyway, is the ED financially responsible?
So the executive director as an officer, and I think it's hard to argue that the executive director is not an officer. So as an officer, the executive director would have those same fiduciary duties. Yes.
Okay, not surprised. Okay, I just didn't know the law. The last one is, so we are going to be looking for a new commercial space for now, because we gave up our lease, at the beginning of the pandemic, and that was, arduous. But what I wasn't familiar with is, so the legal negotiation fee. Is that going to be true for every kind of lease negotiation, in a commercial environment? I guess I wasn't aware of that.
It depends on the type of lease you're doing. So if you're going to enter into like a WeWork space where you're just signing a simple license agreement, you don't necessarily need to have a real estate attorney involved. But if you're entering into a long-term lease, you absolutely need a real estate attorney to look at it, even if it's a small lease. And you should assume that it's heavily negotiated. Commercial leases are never signable when you first get them. They go back and forth many times. And if you have a pro bono attorney, that's great, but be really careful. You're not getting something for free that ends up costing you the deal. So instead, make sure you have, if it's a pro bono attorney, they have to be really involved and committed to their time, and they're not going to be swapped out with other people mid-project. And that if you end up having to spend the money on engaging your own attorney, 9 times out of 10, we recommend spending that money. It's some of the best money you can spend, having a qualified, focused, responsive real estate attorney. And by the way, you have one on this presentation right now who's one of the best in the industry, David Goldstein.
Yeah. Here, let me just quiet that. The last thing is that we've been very, I apologize for the phone ringing. It's my phone system, and 20 years later, I still don't know how to work it. So, but anyway, is free. Okay, the pitfalls of free. So we've been donated meeting space for the past 20 years from Northwell, and now that I'm the ED, I'm like, what's our liability? Like, I never thought about that as a board member, but as the idea, to my knowledge, it's always been, you guys have this space. They actually give us 2 spaces. And I don't remember ever seeing a signed agreement, ever. But maybe there is. But anyway, what are the pitfalls of free? Are there
Maybe
any?
to speak to the liability aspect, almost all of our clients have board members that donate space for the board meetings, and I've never seen any agreement for that.
Okay.
But the thing that we always say for process purposes is you can't count on free in perpetuity. So you want to be able to control the important spaces to you.
Okay.
And one final, go ahead.
Go ahead, Stephen, go ahead.
Oh, just one final thing is for all of you, if you're a program-based nonprofit, one of the best ways to get your board activated is to bring them on a site tour of seeing your spaces in action. We've seen this time and time again. The board members all of a sudden wake up and realize what the organization does. So it's a good excuse to get the folks really involved.
And in terms of whatever it is you're doing, whatever activity, whatever space you're using, it's really important to make sure that your insurance broker is aware of that and understands that, and that is integrated into the insurance coverage that you have. So it really, I think you're getting the sense, and the people on our panel today, we're all completely dedicated to the nonprofit sector. That's what we do. These things are all very specialized, even nonprofit accounting. I always encourage my clients to make sure that they've got an accountant that focuses on the nonprofit sector. So insurance is the same. It's important to have an insurance broker who's going to spend time with you and understand what you're doing to make sure that you have the right liability coverage and protection. So all of those things are very important. And to echo what Stephen said, you very often get what you pay for, and all of these areas are incredibly specialized. And if you're going to protect the nonprofit and protect the board, you really need to be engaged with people who have the expertise that you need.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have some questions here in the chat. One question is, curious to know whether or not the best practice is for the ED to be a member of the board. If so, voting, non-voting, something else, very small animal rescue in Virginia.
Right. And I don't know if Christine, if you want to weigh in on this too, but the best practice is for the ED not to be a member of the board, because really it's the board that supervises the ED. And the ED is answerable to the board. So that separation is in fact the best practice. If you've got an ED who's on the board, better that they not be a voting member of the board, but really best not to have them on the board at all. And almost all of my clients subscribe to that approach, where the ED is not a board member. It is really important to keep that separation.
Thank you. We do have somebody's hand up, Sean.
All
there
right.
you go.
Thanks. I'm Sean Slevin with Swim Strong Foundation. We are a very small not-for-profit that's primarily volunteer-based. We'll be celebrating our 16th year next month. And we've delivered impact that goes way beyond our size. And so nobody knows how tiny, who is behind the curtain in our organization. But COVID gutted us in many ways, not the least of which reflects on our board, with people moving, people changing situations, family situations, health situations. So our board, which we fought to get to 11 people at one point, is down to 3. And best ideas to really get out there and get people involved in the board would be welcome. We have an issue around the give and or get, which for us is I think small and quite reasonable at $2,000 per year, but it is an issue of people not making that payment for a multitude of reasons. And I do also am starting to build an advisory board with the idea of, transitioning those people from the advisory board onto the full voting board, after a year or so, and they get a good look under the covers, so to speak, as to what we are. But I'm very grateful to hear your points of view. Thank you for all of the information provided this far.
I can jump in. Sean, thank you so much. Nice to see you. We work with organizations that are in the same boat as yours. It's not uncommon, unfortunately, especially given the pandemic. And so what I would suggest is coming together, and thank you for mentioning the advisory board, because that is a great way of sort of testing the waters, or if it's a youth advisory board or the baby board, as folks call it sometimes, to get a feel for members without fully committing. So thank you for mentioning that. With regard to building over time, I would say to commit to a strategy together with your board, whether it's someone in-house facilitating or get on a path. We put roadmaps together over time, and you want to start with probably the board matrix piece, right? Where are the gaps? Who are the kind of people you're trying to attract? Define those roles that you're looking for. And from there, you can, just like an organization recruiting new staff partners or members, you can really seek out those folks and come up with the different connections that you have to tap into to find them, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's board source, a formal posting, whether it's different networking events. So it's just a matter of brainstorming and coming together and setting those targets. It doesn't happen overnight, but if you really define what you need, it will feel less overwhelming than trying to rebuild suddenly from 3 back to 11.
Thank you. And any thoughts on the give and or get issue?
Oh. Well, what I would say about that is everything should tie back to your strategic plan, right? When it comes to resource development, which should be a big bucket of all of our strategic plans, where are your funds coming from, right? And if you decide that you're an organization that needs to rely on your board for fundraising, right? A lot of organizations could have the majority of government funding. But if your board is going to be a fundraising board, there are ways to define this, but it can be nuanced, right? So if it's right for your organization, you have to kind of look at your folks, because you're dealing with an existing group, and then you might be trying to recruit potentially different prospective members that have more resources. So it's really about what the goals are for your organization and the amount of resources you're looking to bring in and the different places you're getting those from. So it should all tie together. There's no one answer for every organization when it comes to a give-get policy. I know that's, it's the it depends answer, and Sean, I'm happy to talk with you more about it, but it can work very well if it's done in a strategic way. It can also backfire in terms of relationship maintenance.
Yeah, for sure.
If not conveyed in a really thoughtful manner, but there is a way to do it and have it work regardless of the direction.
And just
Thank
to
you.
comment for a second on the size of the board, first a bright line legal requirement and then a practical point. So if you're a New York not-for-profit corporation, the law requires you to have a minimum of 3 board members. So that's the bare minimum. But that's all that it is, the bare minimum. Three board members might work in the context of a family foundation, but in terms of a functioning charitable or educational nonprofit, it's really hard to see how that could work long term. It is the bright line minimum; you can't go below that. But on a practical level, when you think about the oversight responsibilities that we talked about just a little bit, how do you do that with 3 people? And I don't really see how you can. So that those 2 things, the bright line minimum of 3, but the practical necessity to increase the board from an oversight and also from a resource perspective are things to keep in mind.
Thank you. I do want to be cognizant of time, and we have a lot more questions to run through. The next one is, and it's funny, somebody just texted me a question, it all goes together. Are there any recommended resources for developing roles, responsibilities, and expectations of board members? And to add to that, the question that I received via text was, are there any resources for onboarding your board members and how that should be presented?
I'll throw one out that we love to build off of and tailor for a lot of our clients, and that's the Adelphi Center for Nonprofit Leadership on Long Island. There's a place on their site, we can circulate the link for executive directors and boards with a lot of templates that are very, very helpful and easy to adapt. And so I'll throw that out first and see if David or Stephen have others.
Okay, thank you. The next question is there a best practice on how many board members one should have? We already talked about that. So, or is it based on budget size? So we already discussed that. I'm sorry, let me move on to the next one, which is there any reason why, oh, that's a good question, founders should not be on the board if they are no longer staff?
So a founder can be a board member just like any other board member. It sometimes can be there's something called founder syndrome, and the founder sometimes in certain situations, not always for sure, but in certain situations has trouble sort of separating and kind of understanding their role in the governance structure of the organization. So it's absolutely appropriate if the founder is going to function like a board member should and fulfill the fiduciary duties of a board member. It's absolutely appropriate for the founder to be a board member, just like any other board member. And board members all have the same fiduciary duties. It's a collective, so nobody, because they're an officer or because they're a founder or because they have particular expertise, has authority by themselves to make decisions for the board. It really is collective, and everyone has the same voice and the same vote and the same responsibility. So something else, by the way, on that note, good to remember, a lot of people get confused about this. Board members can never give a proxy to anybody else to vote for them. And that kind of fits into what we're saying, because you as a board member have that personal fiduciary duty and legal responsibility, and you can't delegate it to somebody else.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is there a New York State mandate about equity, diversity, and inclusion?
I'm not sure off the top of my head if there's anything mandatory. If that's a question, follow up with me offline on that, and we'll utilize my my labor and employment practice at my firm that works with pretty much all of my nonprofit clients, and that might be something I'm quite sure that they're familiar with and they can help with. So reach out to me offline, and I'll put you in touch with our labor and employment practice.
Let me just add to that question that perception is extremely important as it relates to equity and inclusion as a whole. And many prospective board members, particularly younger generation, are looking to see that organizations are keeping DEI efforts at the top of their priority list and incorporating that into strategic planning. So it does also factor into the types of board members you may attract when that is part of your board's matrix and sort of goals.
Also relevant to funders very often. So, yep.
Just to pile on, a lot of our clients are pushing for more diverse boards. They're also pushing for more diverse vendors. And when you're looking for public money for a project, there's oftentimes a mandate to have a certain percentage of diversity in your vendors. Sometimes that's 30% is the common threshold if you're getting city, state, or public monies. And so just be conscious of that. And it's part of the reason why we created Open Impact. We were formerly part of a big national firm. All the big national firms are not women and minority owned. So we created a new entity that's affiliated with a big national firm called Transwestern, that Open is a women and minority owned business.
Thank you. The next question is, our board refused to establish a give-get policy. What ways can we encourage them to contribute financially?
Well, it looks like this question and the next one are very connected in terms of trying to transition to a fundraising board, is I think what a lot of organizations are struggling with or considering. What I would say is the more you can incorporate and keep your board apprised of your overall strategic plan and goals, it should all tie together. What you will end up coming to together in a collaborative way is the resource development goals. And in order to achieve those resource development goals, if part of that needs to come from, if the board needs to be an important component, given your organization's goals, the best way is to come to those decisions together. And so you could, consider having a strategic planning committee giving updates to your board, where it becomes clear that if this is what you know as a fundraising committee, somebody wrote that they've created a fundraising committee, which is great. If you can come to these decisions and goals together, you're much more likely to get the buy-in of your board members, is what I'll say kind of more broadly. But I'm happy to talk offline to those of you who are trying to make that transition, because it can be challenging.
And if I may add to that, one of the things that I have always found really helpful when you want to encourage your board members to get more involved in terms of fundraising is if you create something that's a simple fundraiser for them to work on, whether it be, I would do something called Fundraiser in a Box, where they could host a dinner party at their home with their friends, or just have something where they're sharing information. The easier you make it, the more you're going to have people on board to work through that with you. We have another question. Can you share a good example of a nonprofit board strategic plan? I think that would go to the Adelphi template. Yes, no?
I'm sorry, I missed, this is Andrea. I came in late to the call because I had a conflict. And Christine, I'm really interested in a lot of the things that you're saying, because I think my board needs to do a retreat. And I think we need a better way of showing a strategic plan. So I know I've asked you a really long question that doesn't have a short answer, but if I could contact you offline, I would love to do that.
Sure, be happy to. Yeah, we do kind of board development planning, but that has to really be part of your overall strategic plan. So we can try to share a template for everyone to look at, to just see if your organization has those components in place and where there might be some gaps. And the same goes for your board development plan.
I mean, they just made me, I just joined the board in November, and they made me chair of the development committee, which I think some people are calling a fundraising committee. But without a strategic plan, it's kind of like like, is this right or is it wrong? Is it goal oriented? So I'm a strategist by profession. And so I'm like trying to figure out, how do we pull this back together again? So.
Yeah. Turn that challenge right into an opportunity to kick off an overall strategic planning process if there's no active plan. Absolutely. I'd love to talk to you about that. It's my favorite topic.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Right.
So we're coming to the end. I really would like to extend my gratitude and thanks to our speakers. You did a great job, and I think you have really opened up the opportunity to please welcome calls from our attendees today if they want to speak to you offline. My job is to hear what you're saying and figure out how we can continue to support our nonprofits. It looks like we could have 2 more workshops about recruiting valuable board members and how to go about doing that, and also how to recruit and develop a diverse board. So we are here to help our nonprofits. If there's a topic you would like for us to present on or talk about or provide you resources on, please, please, please reach out to us. This is why we're here. And I really, once again, want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your day to be with us. I want to thank our speakers again. And for those of you that are not members of the Nonprofit Resource Hub, please consider a nonprofit partnership. It is free of charge to our nonprofits, and you will get a wealth of information, resources, and support from us. So with that, I thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. So long.
Thank
you.